distance growing between what you're told and what you're thinking. All the governors of status quo know that their old that ship is sinking. Go for it, you know, when we're together, baby, there's nothing that we can't do. So ignore the disapproval, let's go for the free and love on me and you. Yeah.
I still find you I like this one. New York, LA Times, they both reverse transcribed this rhyme simultaneously. They tried to get inside his mind. Hits Amazon catalog, rebuild Babylon, unroll a master scroll to the surface. He sketched the schematic on. Palanquin carries a poet roadmap in a song, retracing the steps of a journey never traveled before. The mandolin was laid across legs, bruised and bandaged. Short supply of first aid is why his wounds were rancid. A musician played Bobby McFerrin. Don't worry, be happy. Gradually, if things get worse, you adapt naturally. Choose your fate as you near death and move away from a recuperative state. These pharmaceuticals make them hallucinate. It's nothing new to pay dues. How much you produce today? You know what they say, it's business as usual. Okay, because of sanctions, they are banned from international bank transfers. They stealth bombed Wakanda after they killed Black Panther. The ancestors were angered. When I heard about it, I was in transit in a foreign land. The news feed was in a foreign language. The Starlink satellite standard couldn't give me a serious answer. The Sirius satellite system was tampered. My fintech financer finally translated the transcript. My legs failed me and I fell, leaving my spirit standing, weeping in sadness. What are the chances? Looking down at cannabis through stained Google glasses, wailing in anguish. It's hard to cope with something so savage, let alone tragic. The melanated man mourns on the Sabbath while America's streets are swarming with panzers, horses, carriages, cannabis, hands-free lariats, control-free energy, palanquins, the skies pour liquid acid, water treatment, tap waters, brackets, tech support taken over by hackers. Don't believe me? Blow me. You repeat me? Better call. This is a goodie, but oldie 5.1 Dolby. The Romans tied every sniveling son of a nun, moaning to each cadaver closely. Toxic exposure from bodies decomposing in the hot sun roasting, painstakingly and slowly infecting the flesh of anything living, laying there loathing, selfishly indulging down a structurally corroding path of primroses with eyes nearly closed. I suppose you could say barely open, swaying to and fro, spraying saliva from their throats, foaming, playing karaoke, choking. To me it sound like ogling, but it is worth noting this forbidden, foreboding, tongue scolding was originally OEM, designed by Boeing, promoting anal swab probing, exploding from an efficient battery warning. Do the research, homie. I ain't trolling. My newest CD frozen. Your skin smoldered, overheated and swollen, steaming and smoking and stinking through clothing. I need a moment to go breathe in the open. Fucking rappers got me sicker than COVID, and you know this. Still the dopest, free to people like Moses. Hyper focus with both barrels loaded, cause I'm a poet. And when my palanquin pull up, climb my board. Let's go, biz, peep the components. Pete Rock, can I bust pole? Shoulder to shoulder in foxhole with speed loaders. Lord cyborg soldiers, hot fire like dialogue told you,
Yeah, welcome to the Machine Lies, where we talk about the lies of the machine on the machine that lies, and we expose the underlying hoax of our age, which is the myth of progress, the rule of efficiency, okay, the techno-liberal system, okay, that is built on a system of built on methods of technological enslavement and scientific totalitarianism, right? So how did we get into these predicaments, right? Well, we got different ideas in the birth and death of the liberal project, right? And its sublimation under the system of technology, right? And the whole technological world system. Blessings, madam. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing today? Hey, blessings.
Hi, Red. I'm good. What's good with you?
I'm doing okay today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You went early today. This is neutral ground, and then I have
blessings,
shadow
madam.
and light. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw that in the chat, so I just added you without checking. So yeah,
I appreciate you.
Easy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I really never set up StreamYard, so I I guess I should put something to identify me on there with, huh?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
What are we doing today?
Well, I'm talking a little bit about different thinkers and ideas that help support the rise of techno liberalism on the one end. And
Hmm.
so it's about how technology and liberalism get linked together. So liberalism obviously is responsible for this universal ideology that gives birth to the ideas. Well, it really came from the religious outlook, right? They wanted to bring the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven on earth, and so this sort of pseudo eschatology really developed in Europe. So this gave birth to the severing of the transcendental scope, right? And basically the rise of science and liberalism. Right now, they wanted to create a world system. Like most of the liberals and the people who wanted to create a technocratic civilization, they said the best way to do this was to create a world government, right? So
Exactly.
so we're looking at how this all-encompassing system and who are the promoters and who are the thinkers and philosophers who basically promoted the rise of this system, right? And then sort of looking at what Alul has to say about how this idea that man can be free everywhere if he uses science and technology to liberate himself is
Mm-hmm.
actually enslaved mankind, actually led to the opposite,
Exactly.
right? The
Yep.
idea of liberalism and freedom has actually helped to enslave mankind under the
Yep.
under the guise of technology, right? And
And
science, right? So
many of us just go along with our own creation of the bars, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, we're not in charge of our creations, right? Like
Right.
like how the Tao says. See, we get last Tuesday we gave a whole entire presentation on the Tao, and one of the main principles he says is that you don't own your creations, and you can't
Exactly.
change the world. You can't improve nature, right?
And
So
now we
yeah,
are the product. I mean, you know what I mean?
right,
Because
exactly. Yeah.
using social media and all these platforms, everyone is a is an object, not a creative being.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, yeah, I love you. I just wanted to say that, and I love Red too. And I'm gonna jump down and go back to your wonderful chat.
Yeah. Blessings, madam. Thank you so much for
Okay.
joining. Yeah.
I'm a little bit shy, but I love you guys. I just wanted to say hi.
Yeah. No worries. The feeling is
Okay.
mutual. And
All
thank you
right.
for
Great.
yeah. Thank you for popping in.
Easy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
Bye.
yeah, by she's absolutely right. What she said is absolutely true, and actually, she's mirroring what my presentations are talking about. Alul, that man has become the object of technique, right? So, in a technological society, or a technological world system, right? Man becomes subjected to techniques, right? So this this idea that that technique becomes the molder of more the shaper of human lives, right? As it's clearly become in this modern age, right? That this is a major idea, right? When the technique of deciding man's fate, right, comes in line comes in line with technical processes, right? That's when basically man becomes an object of technique. And when this science of how to make man the object of technique becomes a central place of society, then you have the birth of the technological society, as Alul says, and you have the birth of the autonomy of technique, right? So let's take a look at different thinkers, right, that have called for different changes in social mores, right? Okay, we're going to look at actually, let me open this up first with Thomas Malthus, right? We read this quote earlier. right? And it reflects a change in social mores, right, in terms of technical planning, right? And this has to do with the control of the population in a society, right? So what he says here is, right? He says, for the well-being and welfare of the human race, it was essential that the rate of increase of the population should keep pace with the corresponding rate of increase in the production of foodstuffs and should never be allowed to exceed it. To achieve this, he prescribed the old recipe of abstinence, late marriage, and self-restraint in matrimonial life. Right? So this idea that the family, right, has to come into line with the technical procedures, right, of the society at large, right, with the economic planning in the society at large, right, and so this whole idea that man, right, had to be made the object of techniques, right, that had to be used to control the rate of the population, right, and this management of the population, right, extended to the writings of Bertrand Russell that we read, right? So what he says, I think the subject that will be of most importance politically is mass psychology. Various results will soon be arrived at that the influence of the home is obstructive. Right? The influence of the home is obstructive. Right? That means that they want to get rid of the family unit, right? And this is a process of awakening the individual, right? Right, because in order for man to be um collectivized, he has to be made into or studied as a generalized or individuated unit, right? And there's too much variations, right, when you consider families and tribes and all these types of things, right? So in order to cultivate man on the level of social planning, right, they had to create from the sense of the universal man, right? They had to create a shell of this sort of universal man, right? That could be used, right, in terms of being quantifiable and measurable, right, in its traits and activities. So yeah. So he says the influence of the home is obstructive, right? And the science, right, of how the home life affects the general society is going to be rigorously studied, he says. Right, and it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. When the technique, okay, and he says technique, right, has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. Educational propaganda with government help could achieve this result in a generation. Now he says something very important. He says there are two powerful forces opposed to such a policy. One is religion and the other is nationalism. A scientific world society, okay, which is really a technological world system, right? He says cannot be stable unless there is a world government in place, right? So we have several ideas, okay, or technical procedures being developed by the society at large, right? One is propaganda, a necessary result, right, of means of mass communication. Right? Obviously, propaganda cannot exist in anything but a society that has achieved a certain level of technical advancement. Okay, and the need for mass surveillance. Okay, the other is a regimented control, okay, of the number or the rate of the population increase. Right? And this has to do with studying, right, habits and behaviors in terms of families. And of course, controlling social mores, right, in order to create, again, of course, with the invention of birth control, as we're reading about, right, you could also have sexual liberation. And that's why Malthus was recommending that a radical change in social mores, as was Bertrand Russell, in order to achieve the advancement of a world technological system. Okay. Now I'm going to read certain ideas from my book, Logos Dethroned. Okay. It says here Lucifer was a symbol of the cognitive powers of man, as in Genesis. The serpent promises, ye shall be gods. A picture of Satan adorned Diderot's Encyclopedia. Oh, yeah, actually, let me go to this first because this is actually very important. Whoops, actually, I closed it. Here, give me a second here, folks. Go to my computer history and open up this file here. And read this, right? Because we talked about certain ideas from Martin Luther, right? So we're kind of going in a sequential order here, right? And of course, I've laid a lot of foundations for a lot of things, right? We've talked about Martin Luther, we've talked about Kant, okay, we've talked about Aquinas and Maimonides, we've talked about Hegel, right? And of course, I've given references to their words and opinions, right? Here's Luther from the Table Talk. He says, the science of alchemy I like well, and indeed, 'tis the philosophy of the ancients. I like it not only for its profits it brings in melting metals, in decocting, preparing, extracting, and distilling herbs, roots. I like it also for the sake of the allegory and secret signification, which is exceedingly fine, touching the resurrection of the dead at the last day. For as in the furnace, the fire extracts and separates from a substance the other portions and carries upward the spirit, the life, the sap, the strength, while unclean matter, the dregs remain at the bottom, like a dead, worthless carcass. Even so, God at the day of judgment will separate all things through fire, the righteous from the ungodly. The Christians and righteous shall ascend upwards into heaven, and there live everlastingly, and the wicked and ungodly, the dross and filth, shall remain in hell, and there be damned. So his whole idea about tying alchemy to the salvation of the world, right? This purification, right? This alchemical purification, right, of the world, right, is a sort of quasi-futuristic tone, right? That, yeah, we see that very much in Hegel's work, right? But his underlying respect for alchemy and the Kabbalah and all these types of things signify a change in European society, right? Right, and of course we have the Medicis, right, getting the Hermetic corpus and wanting to translate that more than the writings of Plato. Right, so these are all historically notable facts, right, to set the tone of what the 15th to 16th century in Europe was actually about, right? Right. So yeah, so when you have Diderot's Encyclopedia, right, and you have Satan on the cover of it, right, and you have this notion of man becoming like God, right? Man is the measure of all things in Prometheus, right? And you have the Promethean poetry of Marx and the satanic poetry of Marx, right? And his involvement in the League of the Just, this millenarian organization, right, that wanted the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth, right? Then you see that there's a quasi religious tone to the pseudo eschatology of progress, and that's because it has its origins, right, within these Kabbalistic doctrines, right? So we've demonstrated that many times on the show, right? We've given clear history of different components of those various thoughts throughout history, right? So let me just move on here, right? It says prominent revolutionaries such as Marx and Lenin loved the story of Prometheus, right? Who stole knowledge from the gods and used it to lead man to a new age of promise. This was a promise of the age of scientific salvation. A new scientific age became the eschaton. In the Pauline Creed, God is forced to come to the level of man in order to save man from himself. In short, man is man's own problem, and the solution has to come from man himself. Since this cannot be achieved, the solution comes from the outside, in the imitation of God and the manipulation of matter. In order for God to be lowered, he had to be made more like man. In order for man to imitate God, he had to raise his natural capacity to that of God. In Chronicles 28:9, we read that God knows the imagination of the thoughts, quote unquote. We can enslave ourselves with the tools we make to manipulate reality by creating outside ourselves. Okay, and really outside of nature. Right, I should have said in the book here, right? When we do this, our dangerous misinventions can create an alternative reality that we can have no control of. But that was based on our hidden intentions and motives that we often are not clear of when we first begin the process of inquiry. In the Gnostic text entitled Hypostasis of the Archons, the serpent of the Garden of Eden is portrayed as a good guy, just as in the Gospel of Judas. An inversion of the role of bad and good takes place. Furthermore, the ancient mystery religions promise to free man from his material encasement and offer a continued rebirth by erasing of the curse of mortality and the undergoing of apotheosis, the transfiguration into of human into divine. This was most clearly represented in the iconography of the phoenix. The phoenix ascends sexual duality of birth and death by giving birth to itself. When the phoenix dies, it lays an egg containing a perfect replica of itself and is therefore continually reborn. The mystical beast was a symbol of divine wrath and power, or the dark side of spirituality. Essentially, the same concept can be seen in the Ouroboros, or a snake eating its own tail. Marx early satanic apocalyptic verses use some of the same formula. They reflected on leading humanity astray to forsake God and entering into a pact with Satan. In a poem called Human Pride, he talks about dethroning God and says, quote, "Then will I wander godlike and victorious through the ruins of the world, and giving my words an active force, I will feel equal to the Creator," unquote. In a poem entitled The Fiddler, quote unquote, he writes, quote, "That art God neither wants nor wisps, it leaps from the brain, from hell's black mist, till hearts bewitched, till senses reel, with Satan I have struck my deal," unquote. And of course, we're reading the great text, I believe is great, huge influence on me, by Philip Collins, entitled The Faustian Face of Modern Science. I believe he's a Catholic, right? But he's come up with some pretty interesting reflections about the history of philosophy and theology and their relation to the foundations of scientific totalitarianism. Right, and I think some of the ideas that I've gleaned in my studying of history and philosophy seem to match up with his ideas there, right? So yeah, Faustian face of modern science reasons, in all likelihood, Marx probably denied the existence of Satan as a literal metaphysical entity, yet it is important to remember that the Luciferian conception is premised upon the same existential contention. Unquote. While the existence of evil is generally accepted by one who seeks to do good, of course, whether they believe this evil created by God or inherent in the world is another question. Its existence is generally denied by some wayward mystics and nihilistic atheists. Perhaps the most clear similarity between Hobbes, Hume, and Marx is a general view of the lack of any intrinsic nature in man. Colin writes, Marx devalued humanity. Again, it is extremely ironic that such a devaluation stemmed from an anthropocentric belief system. Unquote. This was the crux of all liberal protests and antinomian heresy. By the way, I was reading about antinomianism when this all started, and it has a lot to do with the rise of Martin Luther and his whole his thoughts, right, and their interpretations of Paul, right. So yeah, you guys can look into that, right? It's pretty interesting stuff, right? Obviously, Luther condemned antinomianism eventually, right? But that doesn't mean that a lot of his thoughts didn't influence some of the main antinomian ideas, right, and antinomian controversies, right, such as those that were engaged by Philip Melanchthon, another thinker, right, that was connected to Luther that promoted alchemy and the Kabbalah. Yeah, let me throw this link here for Neuro. Yeah, we had to go live early today. We're having a little maintenance done, and we may not have internet later. So I decided to just do the stream early instead of starting it at midnight or something like that, right? Waiting for the internet thing to, or like 11 or whatever. I don't want to push it back that long. But yeah, blessings to all the people. And of course, we will be back tomorrow with the regular show, 9:15 p.m. Hopefully. And yeah, we'll be continuing some of our main reflections, right? We're looking at a range of thoughts. Okay, and I'm constantly finding new material. So yeah. So it should be pretty good. Okay. So anyways, yeah, so this was the crux of all liberal protests and antinomian heresy, wearing one's suffering as a badge of contention. Ironically, as G.K. Chesterton observed, quote, all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind, and the modern skeptic doubts not only the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. He further states, in short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, is forever engaged in undermining his own minds. This is because the modern revolutionaries view man as materially determined and morally quantifiable. The rule of experts was already suggested by Plato and Francis Bacon. However, it needed the appearance of the technological age. Right. Okay. Yeah, the idea of philosopher kings and philosopher scientists is what I'm referring to there in Plato and Bacon, right? However, it needed the appearance of a technological age to make its intrusion into political and economic systems. Okay, that's what we're going to be looking at in detail when we go to Elul here. Okay, intrusion into the political and economic systems by the use of technical experts in mass psychology that were to systematize the motivations of the herd. Systematize the motivations of the herd, sorry. Excuse me. Plato suggested that even the musical taste of the population should be developed starting from a young age, where the brightest are taken from their parents and put into a system of public education. Bacon suggested that philosopher scientists manage the population. Since man was seen as a tabula rasa, ready to be imprinted, he was essentially malleable as part of the world of becoming. In a most accurate assessment, G.K. Chesterton writes, the thing that, and we love this quote here. Find a way to put this as a banner on the channel. The thing that really is trying to tyrannize through government is science. The thing that really does use the secular arm is science. And the creed that really is levying tithes and capturing schools, a creed that is really enforced by fine and imprisonment, the creed that is really proclaimed not in sermons but in statutes and spread by pilgrims. I'm sorry, not by pilgrims but by policemen. That creed is a great and disputed system of thought, which began with evolution and ended in eugenics. He goes on to say materialism is really our established church, and in that church, jabby stabbies are the new baptism. While many notable thinkers,
Oof.
yeah, yeah, while many notable thinkers within the West have offered criticism of the mechanization of the world by modern man, there's little talk of the origins of the ideology. And why it was found only among European societies. The answer does not come about in the studies of the Protestant work ethic, quote unquote, which fails to account how Christianity was altered. That it was altered through many different modes, right throughout history. Right, I list a bunch of different alterations to Christian doctrines throughout time, right? Okay, we see in Thessalonians 4:11 and other such passages the quiet conformity, right? And actually, that's one of the things that I'm going to write about is 4:11, that tells Christians to work with their hands, right? Live a quiet life on your own and work with your hands. Okay, it says do your work on your own, right? So this, I think, is a proclamation against complex machinery, right? Obviously, Paul was a leather worker, right? So there's a lot to consider there, right? About the way he lived his life and the way he earned his living, right? And how he applied himself to that, right? So we have to remember that living a simple, quiet life, minding your own business, right? Not giving the authorities of the state a reason to meddle in your life and all this type of stuff, right? Those are all proclamations of the Apostle Paul, right? And I'm, in my, second edition of this, I'm willing to incorporate a lot of these reflections, right? Because they're very significant, right? And I don't think that Christians are taking them seriously, right? Because it literally says live quietly and work with your own hands, right? So this seems to be a line against technique, right? But it says those who view Protestantism as laying a foundation for classical liberalism do not apparently address the level of religious subversion that was necessary in order to derive classical liberal views from traditional religious ones. Okay.
I'd say that line in Thessalonians would do way more for the cause of Christianity than pretty much any preaching or evangelism.
Right, like Paul rejects the modern world so clearly in that line. You
would at least get some followers by doing that. Just tending to your own business and giving to the community, which some Christians do that, which is great. So It's not like I'm not trying to blame them all or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, but obviously the weaponizing of the Pauline doctrine by Martin Luther into sort of antinomianism, right? His project of world salvation that they were going to sort of use, right? And this idea that the Epistle of James has to be burned, right? It's an epistle of straw. And the whole language of grace and salvation by faith versus the ideas of reason and morality, right, and all of these other ideas, right, that basically Luther sort of looks down on, right. So there's a lot of different notions, right, and he and of course there's a lot of stuff in Calvin that we haven't really looked at, right? Calvin's full of, I think, bad ideas as well, right? But
And what do they call it? Hypergraphia. He wrote too much. Well, a lot of them wrote too much, but
yeah, I mean, you can't bring Michael Servetus back,
no,
and
you can't.
yeah, so
Rest in peace to him.
but yeah, anyways, the goal is not reached by introspection and reason, or by good deeds and righteous works, right? These cannot guide man to faith, right? And I'm looking at doing a critique of Lutheranism, right? Man must toil as grace was taken to mean not that God had given one a favorable disposition, but that man could not be saved by his own volition. This casting off, especially of the role of introspection and reason and a favorable disposition bestowed on man for the attainment of faith, was a project shared by radical empiricists, religious mystics, eventually Puritans and Protestants, right? It trickled down to them instead of being invented by them. The aesthetic value of work is just a necessary consequence of this worldview, which already seeks a general conformity under natural law. To be justified, vindicated, and included are main themes. Acceptance, quote unquote, is a bridge between suffering and grace. Practical actions and disciplined labor led to meaningful work. That God makes some productive and rich and others mean and in subjection as wretched vessels prepared for destruction was the right interpretation. But a harsh creed needed time to implement itself. Idleness is just as sinful as covetousness. One was to make a show, one was not to make a show of one's wealth, but to store away for the kingdom of God just as simple and good preparation. The maximization of one's task in doing a lot with a little was a new type of prosperity and diligence in line with God's grace. This was the utilitarian ethic. Okay, so basically, I go on to say that basically the main reformers of this idea were actually not Christians, right? But there were people like Benjamin Franklin and Immanuel Kant, okay, who were actually occultists, right? But they wrote justifications for Christian philosophy in which they severely altered the doctrine of Christianity, right? And they were pretty forthright about this, right? Okay, so obviously this goes all the way up to Abraham Lincoln, right? Talking about the spirit of work. Okay, so Franklin wrote Poor Richard's Almanac. Okay, Locke challenged the notion of patriarchy. Okay, he said that once man was able to through labor, attain his own property. He was no longer under the tutelage of his father. Right, so he created this notion of independence from the family. Right, and this is right in line with those ideas that I was mentioning earlier. Right, by Malthus and Bertrand Russell. Actually, Locke writes a considerable amount about the equality of women and men in the two treatises of government. Okay, and he talks about it in terms of the mother having equal role in having the and producing the tutelage of the child. Right, so he's doing this against the idea of patriarchy. Okay. And okay, in the first treatises, in the first treatise on government, right? He argued that God gave Adam private property instead of private dominion. So he's reinterpreting the Bible. Franklin was seen in 1778 by the French statesman Turgot as the new Prometheus, quote unquote, who had snatched lightning from the sky. The philosopher Immanuel Kant agreed with the statement and also called Franklin the new Prometheus. Franklin writes in his autobiography in a letter to his mother in 1738 about his warm sentiments and good opinions of the Freemasons, and also writes in his autobiography about attending a meeting at the Moravian Church. Essentially, the ideology and iconography of collective salvation, transcendental enlightenment, and liberation from work are all the same. Give me 1 second, folks. A spam call here. But yeah,
Sad trombone.
but yeah, let me finish reading this. I'll play some music and then we'll move on to Alul here, right? But yeah, all these thinkers, right, from 1500s to essentially 1700s, right, and even beyond, right? We're gonna go to some newer thinkers, right? So yeah, he writes about the Freemasons and the Moravian Church. This is Benjamin Franklin, right? He's called the New Prometheus by several writers. Right, this idea of Prometheanism, right, of it stealing fire from the gods, right? Okay, okay. Essentially, the ideology and iconography of collective salvation, transcendental enlightenment, liberation from work are all the same. Bentham had recommended the abolition of poverty by criminalization of the poor and forced labor. The poor were to be given a culture to extract their profit and resources. This is his idea of the panopticon, slave labor plan, right? During the time of the American Revolution, some of the revolutionary militias consisted. Oh, it's supposed to say on. I mean, it's supposed to say of, but it says on. English indentured servants, some of whom joined with the slaves to rebel against the upper classes. A radically based system of slavery was instituted to keep poor whites relying on the system. Such a racial ideology was crafted by British and Dutch Jewish financiers of the slave trade. The end of slavery was not a coming to terms with the brutality of the slave system, but simply finding cheap alternative in industrial technology. Blacks and poor whites were moved to the north to work for corporations to produce machines for the upper crust of society. Essentially, no awakening of conscience can really be seen in terms of the farcical notions of an elevation or evolution of human consciousness. The father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, was promoter of liberalism. Herzl wanted a Jewish nation state modeled on Western European nations. He believed in the myth of progress. He writes in his work entitled, quote, The Jewish State, unquote, which was originally entitled Address to the Rothschilds. Quote, the technical progress achieved in our own era enable even the dullest of minds with the dimmest of visions to note the appearance of new commodities all around him, unquote. Reflecting on the view of material progress from the Western world, he further states, quote, the spirit of enterprise is created. Without enterprise, labor remains static, unaltering. Typical to it is the labor of the farmer who stands now precisely where his forebears stood 1,000 years ago, unquote. He wishes to reject these old ways and says, quote, we are not dependent upon the circulation of old values. We produce new ones. We now possess slave labor of unexampled productivity, whose appearance in civilization has proved fatal competition to handicrafts. These slaves are our machines, unquote. A year after, he formed the World Jewish Congress, which helped European Jews create the Jewish state after 2,000 years of diaspora. The state of Israel can be said to be an invention of modern Europeans, and paradoxically can also be seen as in line with the goals of a secular world order. When fascists and nationalists propose garbs of liberalism under the guise of universal law, it is no doubt a totalitarian endeavor. All attempts to be anti-fascist and anti-totalitarian devolve into all-encompassing plans that end in the same type of totalitarianism. It is the same with anti-cult groups, where the paranoia and uncertainty leads to extreme secretive behavior. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and stop reading this. Right, but I have some notable thoughts I want to read here about Kierkegaard. Okay, some ideas from Skolimowski, some ideas from Wolfhart Pannenberg, a Protestant thinker who's kind of futuristic in his ideas. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna be reading a lot of that from Logos Dethroned. But yeah, we're gonna now move to Elul. So I greatly appreciate you guys, but I think that gives a good catalog of a lot of different thinkers and their thoughts on establishing a technological world system. Right, some of the main intellectuals, right, Kant and Franklin, Diderot, Herzl. Okay, so there's a few of those right there, right? But yeah, Malthus, obviously. But yeah. Anyways, here is a little bit of music, and we'll be back in about 7 minutes with the technological society. And what Elul is going to be looking at is how capitalism and socialism and liberalism and all these philosophies, right, do not impose anything on the technical order, right? And the technical order is autonomous of these various considerations, right? So all of these theories, right, and their justifications are basically old hat. Okay, and obviously, fascism, capitalism, communism, liberalism, all these things have to get adjusted to technical necessity if they want to function well in the world. Right, and this is the great motivator of the policies of our age. Anyways, here's a little song for you guys. We'll be back. A little couple songs for you guys. Blessings.
Eloquent angels ascend from heaven, marked with the number 7. 1,000 rats cover the body, the human anatomy. Psychology, the chaos theory. Burning cathedral, marked for death by the eye of the eagle. A perfect cacophony, murderous sequel. Cold of the desert eagle. Nefarious vampire, words of desire. Romantic choir sang a song as I hung him in fire. Bending space and time. The mirror had Merlin's face in mind. Outside the haunted pyramid, covered in cloth, it rained blood and he studied the book of Thoth. One flesh, one God, and one ghost. One deal, one devil, and one host.
To the language of the mystic arts. Examination now of a cryptic thought. Hidden in the map was a missing box. Remembering the life of a city lost. Black as the night in the burning cross. A savage was the fight, ain't nobody that saw. Off in the night and the body was lost. In the sun is shining all day. Black with the birds singing in hallways. Black with the birds singing in hallways. Covered in the blood, we coming a long way. Covered in the blood, we coming a long way. As it is above, it's so below me. Tell me what I feel, there's no pain. Tell me if it's real, when it's real, it's okay. If it's real, it's okay. My pen is a sword, force tremendous power. The blacksmith, a dragon, live in the hidden tower.
Yeah, welcome back to the show. Let me open this up here for you guys. And of course, we're talking about how liberalism, fascism, communism, socialism, how all of these fall short of imposing anything on the technical order, right? So we got a few pages here in Alul. I've dropped the link in the chat. Feel free to come up and have a discussion with us about these ideas, right? And of course, we'll be continuing this tomorrow, right? So yeah, blessings to all the people that are here. Okay, I greatly appreciate your time. Okay, so here we are, the reaction of the state to techniques, right? So this is a whole idea about how the private techniques move towards the public domain, right? And the complexity of technique becomes absorbed by the state because they have a arm that can guarantee action, right? Okay, because complex technical methods are extremely expensive, right? And they require regulations by the state. So he gives several examples of this. He says, when as a consequence of the circumstances we have studied, the state comes into contact with the techniques elaborated by individuals. Okay. Now there's several things happening there, right? There's a transformation, right, from the nation into the nation state, right? So the sublimation of the cultural forms under the technical forms, right? The ethnic and cultural forms under the technological forms, right? Okay, there's a second idea in which technique integrates the machine into society. The machine itself is antisocial, right? So the various ways that techniques and methods of organization favor mechanistic approaches, okay, consists in the move from the private into the public domain. Okay, the techniques are first elaborated by private individuals. Right, they're too cumbersome for those individuals to manage. They're absorbed by the state through processes of regulation. And so you have the entire techno-liberal complex. Okay. So let's go. He says, when it encounters, right, the state, a private sphere of action, which techniques have transformed into a sphere of public interest, it reacts by taking over this sphere, as well as the techniques which brought about the mutation. Sometimes the state enters a field of action from a very different, for very different reasons than the ones I have so far mentioned. The state will adopt techniques simply because it finds them already functioning. However evident this fact may be, it is necessary to emphasize it. To neglect it is to occasion many misunderstandings. The state will not act otherwise than as individuals have already acted. Insurance companies have developed insurance techniques. When these companies are nationalized, the state retains the old mechanism. After all, there are only a limited number of ways of using actuaries or establishing a police force. Okay, so it's pretty obvious, right? When a technique becomes too large, right, it's simply absorbed by the state. The state doesn't alter the existing forms of techniques, right? It simply puts them to use, right? So, and obviously this is true of all techniques, right? All techniques are invented by private individuals, right? So, how do technologies proliferate on the state level, right? This is the sort of thing that we're chronicling here, right? With Alul here, right? And we're only on the second paragraph here of his analysis, right? But yeah, he says, when an automobile manufacturing enterprise passes under state control, the tempo of the operations and assembly line are not modified. Right? This is particularly clear with regard to material techniques, because techniques seem to us the more constraining, the more they are material. Okay, techniques seem to us the more constraining, the more they are material. Okay, so obviously techniques move from the private domain of being techniques applied by individuals, right, to the public domain of being incorporated into the system as a whole, right? So this whole idea of the machine, right, and of mechanization, right, and of the massification of means, and of course the complexification of means. Right, but he says that techniques move from being immaterial processes, okay, based in private individuals of organization, right, to abstracted to collectivized and integrated into a system as a whole, right, and hence becoming material or mechanical in their expression, right? So, in certain certain forms of technology are too big, as we've seen, right, for anything less than a large corporation or a large state to procure. So he says, but in fact, immaterial techniques display exactly the same characteristic as the material ones, right? Okay, when the French Revolution tried to suppress the systems of education and of charities that the old regime had established through the efforts of private persons, the attempts miscarried lamentably. The effort to create a system of public assistance, hospitals, homes for elderly, for abandoned children, and for the poor, and a system of state education was a major enterprise of the convention and of the Constituent Assembly, but these systems were failures. Excessive systematization and theoretical precision sometimes represent the exact opposite of a good technique. In these instances, the state encountered an organization which was indeed imperfect, but which was, after technical improvements of the 17th and 18th century, very nearly sufficient. Confronted by these institutions, the states, for theoretical reasons, set out to destroy and to recreate on paper systems of education of public assistance, which corresponded to the theoretical decisions of the doctrines of the convention, although they turned out to be neither efficient nor technically sound. In the realm of education, the state sought to break the power of the church and to establish a wholly laicized system. In public assistance, the state set the concept of justice in opposition to that of charity and desired to give support only to the citizens. The new systems, unfortunately, were never able to function. With the directory of the consulate, a backward movement set in. The revolutionary innovations made with such difficulty were repudiated, and the techniques that had preceded them were restored. The university and colleges were reorganized in nearly the same way as the schools of the 18th century. The pedagogical system created by the Jesuits was restored. Hospices and hospitals were reconstituted, and they had, as they had been before the revolution, right? So just as with the hospices and the hospital system and the charity systems, right, and the school systems, okay, the state merely adopted the techniques that the church had already founded, right? Did not invent new ones, right? This is a Lewis point, right? Okay, so he's documenting this number of instances in which technique moves from the private into the public domain, right? Meaning by methods of private individuals, right, and institutions and corporations, right, to then moving to the state body as a whole. And he goes on to say, and since it was difficult to secure new specialized personnel, the old personnel, monks and nuns, were restored to duty. So they even hired back the monks and the nuns. That's pretty comical. The great difference was that now all the institutions were under the control of the state. But although they functioned as organizations belonged to the state, they were in fact identical with the earlier private organizations, he says. The arbitrary creations of the revolution having failed, it was necessary to use already existing technical creations. Right? He says the same phenomenon appeared in the realm of finance under the Third Reich. Okay, there's obviously the whole history of the economic miracle. Performed by the Third Reich. Hitler's revolution, he says, claimed to have done away with all classical methods of finance. It wanted to be revolutionary in the management of nationalized enterprises. In organization of commerce and monetary relations, and even in financial technique, insofar as National Socialism was a party, it emphasized the struggle against capitalism. Federer's program provided for a complete transformation of economic and financial life. Manipulation of money, prices, and wages will lead to a disappearance of capitalism. And to this end, completely new financial forms were recommended. But little by little, financial necessity, in its most traditional form, reasserted itself. To accomplish reforms, money was needed. In 1938, Schacht. You guys know about Hjalmar Schacht? He basically funded the Third Reich. He was a Jewish Freemason. Anyways. In 1938, Schacht reaffirmed the old position Chick tracts. Chick tracts. I have to look that up. Ever read any Chick tracts? They hate the Jesuits. Yeah, there's plenty of people that blame the Jesuits, and there's plenty of people that blame the Jays, right? And they don't look at the ideological or the objective factors of power and control. And they'll continue to struggle and whine and create hate groups and and achieve very little. And it doesn't matter how many donations they get and how many viewers they get. It's all contrived. Anyways, yeah, we're actually learning about National Socialism here. Its origins, foundations, its economic policies. In 1938, Schacht reaffirmed the old position that only the orthodox financial technique of capitalism was capable of furnishing the funds necessary to the Nazi state. Rejection of inflation, short-term financing, refusal to use currency for financing. All these were traditional principles of financial technique. The financial machinery of the Third Reich was nearly identical with that of the Empire in 1914. All this is characteristic of the submission of state and revolutionary doctrine to enemy principles through the effects of techniques, which when they are efficient are necessarily common to both. In essence, the Nazis turned from technically untenable inventions back to an efficient financial technique. A technique identical with the one that dominated in the capitalist countries and in the Soviet Union. He's going to furthermore show how the systems in the Soviet Union and in the American capitalist system are not that different during this time of the Cold War. So yeah, we're just getting started here, folks. Stick around. I get a lot more insight into this stuff. He says, in essence, the Nazis turned from technically untenable inventions back to the efficient financial technique, a technique identical with the one that dominated in the capitalist countries in the Soviet Union At any given moment and in a given framework, given framework, there are only a limited number of techniques for attaining a given result. Holy shit. The technical phenomenon is not modified when an organization passes under state control. According to Simon Weil, Simone Weil, Weil, this explains why a system of industrial rationalization, which ought normally to develop into socialism, in fact can only exacerbate the workers' conditions. Forresty agrees, perhaps involuntarily, when he writes, quote, if technical development has been intensive, then whatever the nature of judicial conditions, profits, unearned income, and even political regime, there has been improvement in consumer purchasing power. This is a central source of the social progress brought about by the last century and a half. This amounts to saying that technical progress breaks down all barriers that technique imposes its structures and social progress. This forward motion of technique is a constant, and whatever variables of the question may be, the state cannot modify technical rules. Okay, we're on page 245 of the Technological Society. The state cannot modify technical rules, and should it attempt to do so, for doctrinal reasons, it suffers an inevitable setback. For this reason, the transition of economy to state control can create only state capitalism, not socialism. Socialism implies the suppression of the state. We shall see further on what it implies with respect to technique insofar as the state continues to exist. Okay, so it's either corporate socialism or state capitalism, right? Those are the real systems, right? Right, that basically bubble up during this whole thing, right? Insofar as state continues to exist, nothing prevents it from calling itself socialist. But in reality, nothing has changed. It is only a sleight of hand trick to say that the same institution with the same rules applied in the same way, having the same results, is socialist, when it's at the service of the people, and capitalist when it's at the service of the capitalist institutions. What does it mean to be at the service of the people, quote unquote? He asks. Such an expression can only designate the service of a state which calls itself socialist, although it does not proceed democratically from the people. And what does it mean to be socialist under those conditions? It means to be at the service of the people. So he's making a joke, right? We're going around in a circle, he says, right? One of the gravest symptoms of our times, that technique has little by little emptied socialism of any content. Beyond evident facts, such as the relation of Stakhanovism, or Taylorism, don't know what those are, or the identity of police methods in the Soviet Union and in fascist countries. A major example is the persistence of the capitalist so-called surplus value, quote unquote. In reality, profit in socialist regimes. The financial system of the Soviets is based to the extent of 80% on the difference between wages paid to the workers and the value of their product. This profit, which the socialist regime professes to have eliminated, has actually been extended. The only difference is that it goes into the coffers of the state instead of the corporation's cash box. But in capitalist regimes, the corporation tends to become a public entity. Exactly. So you see, technique is too big to fail, folks. We're in the socialist regime, they make a profit, and the profit is the product of technical advancement. Right? Just as Herzl said, right? He says enterprise. Right? You need technical advancement to gain investment, to build capital. He says Mikoyan, Mikoyan, in his speech of October 17th, 1953, declared, quote, capitalist commerce has certain technical features that we ought to study. By reason of competition and the difficulty of attracting customers, capitalist countries have developed exact methods of commercial organization. These ought to be applied in those areas of the Soviet Union where they are likely to be efficient, he says. I could go on and show that all technical rules and institutions are identically reproduced in the socialist state. This means that there are no longer any specifically socialist institutions, nor are there any administrative or economic organizations, which are peculiarly the result of socialism. The socialist state, because it is efficient, has been obliged to adopt the technical principles of capitalism. Hence, in order to distinguish the socialist situation from the others, socialism always falls back on the vaguest of all concepts, teleology. Capitalism, it is said, has regard only for itself. It seeks but to preserve itself. Socialism, on the other hand, is a constructive force on the march, but nothing warrants the belief that the means employed will result in socialism. Teleology can only create a stir for a short time and as an instrument of propaganda, but it is far from certain that such a propaganda can give character to socialism, which more and more is losing a specific reality as a result of technique. The state, by taking possession of all technical spheres and instrumentalities, becomes of necessity a capitalist state, substituting itself for private capitalists. And when it has come to understand its real interest, it adds nothing and modifies nothing that, technically speaking, pre-existed. Okay, so this is the main point, right? And yeah, we're going to be ending this soon. So if you do have a question, please step up to the plate sooner rather than later, right? Because we do have to skedaddle. Right, this is why we started the show early here today, right? So he says, when the state realizes the use it can make of techniques, when it understands the usefulness of techniques in all spheres, it moves deliberately to appropriate them. Okay, so the rest of this is going to be all examples of that, right? In the past, and to a certain degree today, circumstances led the state to appropriate a given technique, the fortuitous development of some political trend. The encounter of technique with the state, these led the state a bit haphazardly to adopt a technique, but instances of premeditated action on the part of the state in this direction are beginning to be discernible. For example, the exploitation of propaganda and atomic research. We must expect this movement to gain greater and greater amplitude. For when the state has become, when the state has undertaken some action, it generally goes on to the end. Okay, let me read this quote that Reddington brought our attention to in the Discord there.
Hey.
Yeah, that
One of the little quotes.
yeah, where Hank started.
Where Hank went crazy for like
Hank
no
went
reason.
crazy.
I started to think it was one of his like Discordian like traps or something. But then I was
Yeah,
like,
one.
nah,
Yeah,
probably not.
yeah, 139. Um, actually, 127, 139, 140.
Yeah, the quote in question's from page 140.
Yeah, let me read this one from 127. It says, "The world which technique creates cannot be other than that which was favorable to it from the very beginning. In spite of all the men of goodwill, all the optimists, all the doers of history, the civilizations of the world are being ringed about with a band of steel. We in the West became familiar with this iron constraint in the 19th century. Now technique is mechanically reproducing it everywhere as necessary to its existence. What force could prevent technique from so acting or make it otherwise than it is?" Question, he says. 139. That one was from 127. This from 139. It says the enormous effort required to put this technical civilization into motion supposes that all individual effort is directed towards this goal alone, and that all social forces are mobilized to attain the mathematically perfect structure of the edifice. Mathematically, quote unquote, does not mean rigidly, quote unquote. The perfect technique is the most adaptable and consequently the most plastic one. True technique will know how to maintain the illusion of liberty, choice, and the individuality. But these will have been carefully calculated so that they will be integrated into mathematical reality merely as appearances. Henceforth, it is wrong for a man to escape this universal effort. It will be inadmissible for any part of the individual not to be integrated into the drive towards technicization. It will be inadmissible that any man even aspire to escape this necessity of the whole society. Then on 140, he says every conscious being today is walking narrow ridge of a decision with regard to technique. He who maintains that he can escape it is either a hypocrite or unconscious. The autonomy of technique forbids the man of today to choose his destiny. Doubtless, someone will ask if it has not always been the case that social conditions, environmental, manorial oppression, and the family condition man's fate. The answer is, of course, yes. There's no common denominator between the suppression of ration cards in an authoritarian state and the family pressure of 2 centuries ago. In the past, when an individual entered into conflict with society, he led a harsh and miserable life that required a vigor which either hardened or broke him. Today, the concentration camp and death await him. Technique cannot tolerate aberrant activities.
To which Hank thought that Jesus was a proof to disprove towards that last statement, where supposedly getting famous somehow undo what Ilul says, if I understood Hank right. Which I replied saying, well, Jesus would exactly be an example for that statement. It proves the point. So I don't know what he is trying to prove or what he was doing.
He hasn't been up here in a minute, so we might have to give him a personal invite. But yeah, I know when I gave him more personal invites, he would show up on the spot. But yeah, he is. I actually haven't seen him in the chat either, so we might have to invite him personally. Yeah, the second consequence of technical autonomy. This is on 141 now. He says is that it renders technique at once sacrilegious and sacred. Sacrilegious is not used here in the theological, but in the sociological sense. Sociologists have recognized that the world in which man lives is for him not only material but also spiritual world. That forces act in it that are unknown and perhaps unknowable. That there are phenomenon in it which man interprets as magical. That there are relations and correspondences between things and beings in which material connections are of little consequence. This whole area is the mysterious mystery, but not in the Catholic sense, is an element of man's life. Jung has shown that is catastrophic to make superficially clear what is hidden in man's innermost depths. Man must make allowances for a background, a great deep above which lie his reason and his clear consciousness, right? And we've moved from a religious to a technological consciousness, right, through the desacralization of nature and the myth of progress, pseudo eschatology of progress. But yes, join us tomorrow. We'll bring a lot more reflections for you guys on expanded views on all this, right? And yeah, so I greatly appreciate you guys' participation. Okay, for Neutral Ground, Denise, Browns Boy, Calix, Jake, Crystal Shaman, Dr. E. Okay, thank you guys so much for being here with me. Retro Gamer God, the homie, blessings. Neurojack, of course. Okay, let's see who else was here. Moontan, blessings, madam. I greatly appreciate your time. And of course, the indelible Browns boy. And of course, our friend Shadow Buddha. I appreciate your time, my friend. And for the invite last night. Okay, I appreciate your time. And yeah, so that's about it. That's all we have. Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, peace. Yeah, you got anything to say to these
Treasure.
people? Yeah. Yeah, do not seek the treasure.
And Clippy never did anything wrong. He just wanted to help.
Yeah, Clippy just wants to help. Unlike that big bad AI wolf. But yeah, blessings, folks. Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, so this has been the Machine Lies, where we talk about the lies of the machine on the machine that lies. You can't kill what you can't see. God is heard and not seen. The first step to blinding somebody is getting them to open their eyes. And yeah, what most people think is real is just flickering shadows on a screen, images of things that aren't even real. Isn't that sad, folks? But yeah, the first step to realizing, or to realize how to go past the programming is to realize how you've been programmed. And let me read the quote from Elul, since we have the book right here today, right? You can go ahead and read it. Right, he says, as a matter of fact, reality is itself a combination of determinisms, and freedom consists in overcoming and transcending these determinisms. Freedom is completely without meaning unless it is related to necessity, unless it represents a victory over necessity. To say that freedom is graven in the nature of man is to say that man is free because he obeys his nature. Or to put it another way, because he is conditioned by his nature. This is nonsense. We must not think of the problem in terms of a choice between being determined and being free. We must look at it dialectically and say that man is indeed determined, but that it is open to him to overcome necessity, and that this act is freedom. Freedom is not static but dynamic, not a vested interest but a prize continually to be won. The moment man stops and resigns himself, he becomes subject to determinism. He is most enslaved when he thinks he is comfortably settled in freedom. So yeah, blessings to all the people that are here. And yeah, we'll be back tomorrow with more Alul and others. Okay. And yeah, I greatly appreciate you guys' time. Let me try to find some good music for you guys as we end this stream. And yeah, blessings to all the people.
Is a bit misleading. In the beginning, the Lord said to himself, "Get lost, man." And he disappeared from sight and became all of us. Quest for liberation, quest for deliverance from thinking that you are just you, and realizing after all who you are. We are all entranced, we are all spellbound under the influence of a certain kind of thinking, which makes us just like hypnotized chickens with their noses to a white chalk line, and they can't get off. So in the same way, that white chalk line corresponds to the ego. Each one of us thinks, I am I. We've been told so. We've been educated that way from childhood. So we think, I am I. Not this I that we think we are, but the I which is everything.
break away. We'll be back in a few minutes and lots more.
Radio.
50 cents.
Thank you for tuning in.
Every 3 seconds, someone's identity is stolen.
Worry, fear, afraid to live, worry, fear.
Identity theft protection.
Call now.
1-800-666.
Fear.
50 cents.
Became in peace with all mankind. Became in peace. Became in peace with all mankind.
so far. Now have no money fi spend. Poor man, I feel so far. No God, no job to do. Man, I feel so far. No money fi spend. I feel so far. And this your system. This system. This system. Struggling night and day. Every time, like a rock. This is so hard, like a rock. This is deep, ain't no pity at all. Children cry, woman suffer. For how long we have to suffer? For how long? For how long do we have to struggle? Have mercy, boy. Yes, this your system. So hard like a rock, like a rock. This your system, boy. So hard like a rock, like a rock. This your system, boy. It's so hard like a rock, like a rock. Crying every time, suffering every time. Still nothing, it's so hard like a rock. Hard like a rock.